In this workshop, we are going to go over the basics of the Unity game engine. This session is suitable for teachers with no prior experience with Unity, C#, or game development for that matter. A couple of words about myself and the company. I'm a software developer. I've been building educational products and online courses that teach programming for over 10 years. Throughout these years, we've taught coding to over 1 million learners, hobbyists, developers from all around the world, primarily through our platform Zenva Academy, which includes over 250 courses in various programming languages and game development techniques. But we also have product for schools, which has built from the ground up with lessons and resources that are very ready for teachers and that can be used to deliver content for the digital technology subject that is project-based, that's engaging, and that is mapped to the Australian curriculum. In today's workshop, we're going to start by talking about why is Unity interesting for teachers and for students. We're going to learn how to use the Unity editor so that you can become fully comfortable and familiar with it. We're going to have a quick introduction to coding in C# inside of Unity and talk about how this has been used in the classroom, in particular through our platform Zenva Schools, and of course a Q&A section at the end. So if you have questions along the way, there should be a question mark icon at the bottom. So feel free to add all of your questions there and I'll be more than happy to address them. So what is Unity? Unity is essentially a piece of software that you download and install that allows you to create primarily games in 2D and in 3D, but also interactive tools and programs and applications in various other industries, such as architecture, engineering, automotive, film, and animation. So it's a very versatile tool that is very powerful in terms of what you can do. You can use it for simple projects all the way to huge projects. So some quick facts about Unity. More than half of all the games published these days are made with Unity. And with Unity, you can create games and applications that run in pretty much every platform: mobile, web browser, desktop computers, as well as virtual reality and augmented reality, and all of those upcoming platforms, they're all supported by Unity. The game industry as such is growing. Demand and salaries for game programmers, game developers, and Unity developers is also quite lucrative these days. So this is a good opportunity for students. And what's very important here is that the skills that you develop by learning Unity are transferable. That means you can use them in other disciplines, not only in ICT-related jobs and computer science-related jobs. For example, these are some of the most demanded skills according to the ACS digital polls. So you have skills including problem solving, planning, communication, teamwork, project management, troubleshooting. So all of those things you can help your students develop through the use of Unity as a tool. So now that we know what's Unity all about, we're going to actually go into Unity and start using it. So where do we obtain Unity in the first place? What you do is you go to unity.com, and then there's a big link there that says download Unity. Unity is free to use for schools, for teachers, and for personal use. People only have to pay to use Unity once you're using it for your, say, a game development business, and you're making a certain amount of revenue per year, which once you get to that point, it is not an expensive price to pay for the tool. So essentially, you and your students won't have to pay to use it because they have special licenses for educators and schools, as well as hobbyists and individual learners. All right, so once you download Unity, you'll go through an installer. And once that's completed, you'll have access to this program here, the Unity Hub. So this is where you manage the different versions of Unity that you've downloaded, as well as your projects. So when you need to install Unity here, you go to installs, and then you click on Install Editor. And the one thing I want to mention is that for schools and for learners in general, I recommend that the only versions that you should be using are the LTS versions, in particular, the latest LTS version. LTS stands for long-term support. So every year, Unity will release an LTS version that will have the name of the previous year. So Unity 2021 LTS was released in 2022. And that version will have 2 years of full support. And it's also designed to be stable. So you're less likely to run into bugs and issues. On the other hand, if you do want to play with new features, with technology that's a little bit more on the cutting edge, then there are also pre-release versions as well as non-LTS versions. But again, we recommend using LTS, and in our courses, we keep them up to date with the LTS support versions. So usually after a new LTS version is out, we'll usually 1 to 2 months after that, we will have our courses updated to that LTS version. All right, so you've got Unity, and then what you do here is you go and create a new project. So you click here, and you can select whether this is going to be a 2D or a 3D project. In this case, we're going to be doing a 3D project. You give it a name and save it somewhere in your computer. Now, when you do this, it can take 1 to 2 minutes to have the project ready. So what I'm going to do is open a project that I have already created. And in fact, I have Unity already open here. So this is what Unity looks like the first time you open it. When you open any software for the first time, it looks a little bit scary. There are all of these windows, all of these panels. What are they for? And sometimes people are a little bit afraid of dragging things because you could accidentally move something to the wrong place, and then all of a sudden you don't know what to do. So one of the first things that we like to teach and that I recommend showing your students is if you go and start dragging things around and you accidentally mess it all up, you can always go back to Window, Layouts, Default, and you're back at the start. So there's nothing to be afraid here when clicking on these panels. All right, with that said, let's look at what we've got here. On the left side, we have what's called the hierarchy, and these are the game objects in your game. You can see that it says here sample scene, and there's a little arrow which I can click and it expands. So I can see that there is a main camera. The camera is essentially the eye of the player. So this is what your player would be seeing. You can see it here. That's your camera. And then you have a light that's added by default. So these are all, the scene is essentially, think of the scene as like a container where all of your objects are living, kind of like the stage of a theater. And then you have all the different props and actors. So that's the scene. And then you have all of the different game objects. You can create new game objects by right-clicking and then going to 3D object. We can go and add a cube, for example. We can also do it again and add sphere. And we can also go and add a plane, right? So you can see a few different things. So this is the hierarchy. And then the place where we manipulate all of these game objects is called the scene view, right? It's a scene up there. So that's where you're going to be moving things around. So you can click on items and you can move them, change their position. And what you see here where it says game, that's what the camera is looking at. I like to have my game view next to the scene view so that I can keep it all in one place there. So I'm going to drag it and place it there. When you click on any of these game objects, you might have noticed that here on the right, you have the inspector, and that's showing some properties about the object that I clicked. Now, again, there's a lot of stuff here. So let's just collapse everything so that it's not scary, right? We've clicked on a plane and we can see that the plane has a position in coordinates, X, Y, Z, rotation and scale. So if you click on, say, your cube, now you're going to see the properties of your cube. So what can we do here with this cube? We can move it by dragging those arrows. So those are the coordinates. Y in Unity points up. Then you have X and Z. So they are, I'll show you here, they are a little bit different to what is commonly used in mathematics, where you have the Z axis pointing up. So that is the coordinate system in Unity. So if you click on any of these game objects, for example, the sphere, you can also move its position like so. And in the scene view here, we can actually zoom in by using the mouse wheel. And if you press the mouse wheel button, you can kind of pan yourself like this, pan your view. And by right clicking, you can move the camera, your eye. So this is all the scene view. It's not affecting what the player will see, right? This is what the player will see. If you press play up here, it's like we're running the game. And the game, when it's run, there's nothing here. So you're just going to see, let's see what happens here. It looks like Unity crashed. I guess that can happen in Unity as well as in all of the programs. So we're going to open it again. So once that's loaded, we're going to bring it back into view. But in terms of the user interface, you can see that this is what we've seen so far. We have the hierarchy, the game objects, the scene view, the game view, the inspector, and we haven't yet talked about what's at the bottom. All right, so it looks like we're back. So I'm going to resume where we were. So we were zooming in and out, and with the right click, we could move. And if we press play, that's when you're actually running your game. And this is what the game looks like. Nothing else. There's no user input. There's nothing else. All right. I'm just going to click here in the questions. Somebody cannot hear anything. Well, the microphone should be on, and I will address the other question at the end. All right. So you can move by one axis by clicking on the arrows, but if you click on those little planes that you see, you can also move the cube only in that plane, in those two axes. Just like you can use the arrows, but you can also change the position here by changing the coordinates. For example, if I set this to 0, it will move to position 0. You can also like click here where it says X, and you can kind of slowly drag that to one direction or the other. As a rule of thumb, a position of 1, like one Unity unit corresponds to 1 meter, right? So just that's something good to keep in mind. Besides moving, you can also rotate. So if you select the game object and then you click here in this button that's got those arrows, that's the rotate tool. And then you can go and rotate by clicking on any of the axes. So you can rotate your cube about different axes. So I'm rotating my cube, and you can see the angles here that I've rotated. Just like before, you can go and change that and set that back to 0 or to any number you want. So what if I rotate and then I want to move this again? So let's select the move tool and see what happens. You can see that I can still move this up, but it might happen that you've rotated this and you now want to move it in the new axis after the rotation. So when you select a game object, by default, you have the global coordinates. In the global coordinates, up is always up. But if we change here to the local coordinates, now we have the coordinates of our cube. And in our cube, the y-axis is now pointing at a different direction because we have rotated it. So that's just something that's good to know, that you can sort of switch back and forth between those two types of coordinates. Besides scaling, besides moving and rotating, let's take this sphere to illustrate the next one. We can also change the scale. So the next tool here is this one is the scale tool. So you can scale the size in one axis. If you set the scale to 2, it means that it's double the size. If you want to change the scale in all the axes at the same time, you can click on the that sort of inner cube, and then it will scale it in all directions. So you can make it much bigger or much smaller as well. Yeah. So with that said, just by being able to add spheres, cubes, plane, and moving things around, you should already be able to experiment a little bit with the editor to kind of feel comfortable with dragging things. If you make any mistake, you can always go to edit, undo history, or like undo scale cube, and you can undo that, or press Control Z or Command Z on the Mac. Also, importantly, make sure to always be saving your work, because your computer can crash. Unity can crash just like it did with my computer. Just like we can move these objects, you can also move the camera. So let's get that game view back where I had it before. And you can find your camera and change its position. And you can see that it's going to end in a different place. Now, what happens if your camera ends somewhere else, and I have no idea where my camera is, and I would like my camera to be pointing at sort of this view here? What you can do then is click on your camera, go to Game Object up here, and just select Align with View, and that's gonna make the camera have the same view as that scene at that point in time. Cool. So with this, you could give your students some challenges. For example, even something like building a stick figure or building something with no colors, just shapes, is enough to build a little bit of muscle memory as to how you move these things from one place to the next. But at one point, you might want to add some color. That brings me to this bottom area that we haven't really talked about. So this area here, this is the project area. And this is where your files and folders will live. So currently we have this assets folder created by default. This is where all of our work will go. There's a scenes folder created by Unity with the scene file. But you can create other folders as well. And then there's a packages folder, which is something that you wouldn't normally touch because this has to do with some of the modules that are loaded by Unity. Or if you're adding like third-party modules, you might do it in this manner. But you wouldn't want to modify this directly most of the time. So back into assets, if I want to have some color, I need to do I need to create what's called a material. So I'm going to right-click and select Create, select Material, and we're going to give this a name. Let's call this Floor or Floor Material. And this is a material. So on the side here, we can change the color that it will when this material receives some light. You can change what the color will be when it bounces that light. By default, it's white, but I can choose, let's say, green and select some different color. And then I can drag my material to any of the game objects or to multiple game objects. So I'm assigning that now to the floor. And if we select that plane now, you will see that it has floor material. So back to our material, there are properties here that you can play with in terms of how the light is reflected. So you can change some sort of those properties. They don't look too different when you have a directional light, but we're going to be adding another light so you can see how you can do some more interesting things in there. So let's go and create another material just to practice that a little bit. We can call this cube material, and we could go and select a red, and you can also make it like semi-transparent if you want, play with that alpha property. So you can have a bit of fun there playing with materials, and you can start creating something that could be interesting, that could have something unique to it. All right, so if we now go and want to add more lights, we can do that by right-clicking in the hierarchy and selecting light, and we can choose a point light. So a point light is essentially kind of like a light bulb that you're adding somewhere. You can change its intensity. It's 1 by default. I can kind of click there and move that to make it brighter. I can also change its color, select something a bit more interesting, and you can see how the light's being reflected in the different bodies here in our scene. What you can do as well is you can grab your directional light and you can actually rotate your directional light so that you can even make it so that it's like nighttime. So then you can start making some pretty interesting compositions. So with something like this, you can give your students, they can be creative and build something up. And this is a good idea this is something good to do before there's any programming so that they're familiar and comfortable with the editor itself. And then by the time you start having those programming errors, which everybody will have them at one point, at least you're familiar with what's happening here. A common question that I get is, okay, how do we add, how would we go about adding images and 3D models from, let's say, Blender? So I will show you how you can do that very easily. So let's say that we have somewhere in your computer, you have an image file with like a texture, for example, this. What you can do is you can grab that file and bring it into your project. And then you can select your material. And you see how we have this albedo property. Let's set this back to white. And you can notice that it's hard to see, but there's a little square next to the albedo. It might be easier to see once I move the mouse. So what we can do is grab, select our material, and then grab that image and put that image in that little square. So you can see now that we've got the texture file on the floor, but it's really stretching that texture through the entire floor of our game, and we would like this texture to be tiled. So what you can do there here with the styling, you can type say 2. You can see how you can start trying out different values until this looks about right. If you changed the albedo color, then you would have also that color applied as well as the texture. So if you set it to white, the texture is not being affected. But if you set it to another color, let's say blue, you're going to see that the texture will have that kind of blue tint to it. And now that we have that point light as well, you will see that these properties actually start making a bit of a difference in terms of how much light is reflected or how diffuse that reflection is going to be, right? From all the way from like almost like reflecting a point, like something very, very smooth, to something just very, very broad and diffuse. Cool. So with that, the last thing to show you here is how to add the models. So if you are using Blender, you will normally have a .blender file or .blend. Can't remember it's .blender or .blend. But if you have Blender installed in your computer, you can literally just drag that Blender file into here, and that's going to be enough. If you don't have Blender installed, which is my case right now, I'm not able to import a blend file, but I am able to import another file that I did export from Blender, as far as I remember, which is this player FBX file. So this FBX file comes with a texture as well. So you drag all of that into your project. Actually, yes, 100% certainty that I did make this in Blender because it's UV mapped and everything. So you can see that I brought that in, and I can then grab this player and add it here. And quite often you are going to find that when you import something from Blender or other tools, they don't always look right in terms of rotation or size. So what you do then is you kind of go here and change, okay, let's set it so that it doesn't have rotation. And there's also an option if you click on it, if you want to modify the material further, what you can do is you click on the imported file, and then in here you'll see a tab that says materials, and there's an option to extract materials. Here it is, materials, extract materials. So if I click that, it's going to ask me, where do you want to save these materials? And I'm just going to save it right here, and we're going to select folder. Here we go. And we've got display material now. And we could go and change display material now in different ways and do a lot of things with it, including changing those properties that I showed you earlier that have to do with like light reflection and how colors are from the environment are reflected, and how light is reflected in general. So then you can obviously go here in the player. You could change the scale. If this is too big for you with the scale of 1, you could then set the scale to, let's say, 0.5. And if you want to do that change everywhere, you can click there, and then it's kind of changing the same, setting the same. Let's do it like that, 0.5. So if you click that, then whatever change you make in one of these, it's proportionally applied to all of them, to all of the different axes. So you can then play with that in that manner. All right, so those are, I would say, the basics of the editor. You can do more things like adding sounds, and there's definitely more to it in the editor than what I've shown you, but this is enough to make sort of cool compositions and get comfortable with a few things. So we have talked about parts of the Unity editor. The only one that didn't show you is the console, which is where you see errors from the code. So we are going to look at that right now once we go into the coding. We've talked about moving game objects, rotation, scaling, local global coordinates, materials, importing images, 3D models, and point lights. One quick thing with importing 3D models, because this is a thing where people often have some issues. I've written this guide in our blog that it's kind of like a one-stop guide for importing Blender models into Unity, where I cover all of the different cases, because there are multiple ways to export Blender files, and I'm kind of going through all the main ones and what you have to do then in Unity to get it to function properly. All right. So I have a question here that I'm going to address, which is the so you could upload 3D images from programs like Minecraft, PPT, or Tinkercad as well. The answer to that is that Unity supports pretty much all of the main 3D formats for images, support for models, I mean. So it supports FBX, Blend, OBJ, this open source one that's called something like GLX or something like that. So all of the main formats for 3D models are supported by Unity. As I mentioned earlier, more often than not, once you import it in, you usually have to make 1 or 2 tweaks to get it the way you want. So the answer would be yes. If those programs can export 3D images, 3D models, I mean, in any format that's compatible with any program out there, the answer is yes. There's also a question here that says, is there a game mode where you can maneuver character around the world, interact with objects? 100% yes. That is something that you would do with scripting. So far, none of these really does anything, right? This is not interactive in any way. So the next step is to go into the coding part where you start creating those behaviors. In fact, in one of our courses, we do exactly that. So I will show you that as well later in the workshop. So the next thing that I wanted to show you is just a really, really quick introduction to scripting in C#. So when you install Unity, that usually comes with the installation of Visual Studio. There's a checkbox when you are installing Unity that you need to check if you want to have a Visual Studio installed. I would strongly recommend that you do include it. So once you have that, you'll be able to edit the code. So to create a new script, what you do is somewhere here in your project view, you right-click and then go to Create C# script. I've created a new script, but you can see that the name says new behavior and it's sort of like highlighted. It's because I can go then and change it to something like example. If you don't change the name of your script and the name is sort of set, you can change the name here, but then you also have to change it in the code itself, or you're going to get an error. So always when you create a script, make sure to set the name immediately. But if you don't do it, I'll show you what to do in that case. So we've created a script. It's called example. I'm going to double click on it to get Visual Studio to open up and show me that code. So here we have a Visual Studio. This is what's created by default. If you're new to programming or to C#, there's a lot of boilerplate code here. Don't worry about that really. In fact, we're going to delete that update function method because we don't need it. What's important here is that Unity creates something for you, and then you have a lot of things at your disposal to start interacting with game objects. I named my file example. So if I wanted to change the name of my file, I have to change the name of the file here, but then I also have to change the name in here. All this means it says your example script is going to inherit a lot of properties and behaviors from something called mono behavior, which is part of Unity. All of the stuff here at the top is just, these are libraries and tools that are going to be utilized. In essence, a lot of the code is actually going to be, it's all going to be inside of here, and some of it is going to be inside of Start. When you are doing coding, what you usually want to do first is just run some hello world code. So we're going to go about doing that. What you do for that is if you want to show something in the console, you type debug.log and then parentheses, and we're going to type double quotes here and write hello world. All of the statements in C# need to have a semicolon at the end. So all this is doing is it's saying when this starts, we're going to write hello world. So you save and then you go back to Unity. And if you went and run your game now with the play button, actually nothing will happen, because even though we created the script, we haven't added this script to any of the game objects here. For code to be executed in Unity, you need to add it to a game object. So this is the equivalent of saying, this is how you make a cake, but we're not really applying that recipe at all. So we're not really making any cakes. So what we're going to do is click on this cube, and we're going to drag our script. You can either drag it to the cube itself there, or you can drag it to its inspector area. And once you do it, you will see it here as a component. If you ever wanted to get rid of that script, you can always click on those 3 buttons and click Remove Component. If I now go, I'm going to save, and if I press play to run my game, we should be seeing that hello world up here at the bottom, down here at the bottom. Cool. So we see that. Great. So what else can we do with scripting? Well, a common thing you want to do in programming is to store information, modify information, and we do that by creating variables. Variables in C# need to have a data type. So if we're creating an integer, it's not the same as if we are creating a number with a decimal point or a piece of text, which is called a string in programming. So if you just want an integer number, you start by typing int, and then you can give it a name, for example, score. Press the equal sign to give it a value, and we're gonna set a score of 10. Then we type semicolon to close that statement. Visual Studio will complain about things not being used. So it's saying, we're defining this variable, but not using it anywhere. That's totally fine. So I'm going to copy that and paste it here in hello world. I'm going to save. And if we execute that game by pressing play, there's always a bit of compilation happening. Then we should be seeing that 10 in the console. Now, we said that troubleshooting was a big part of this. So what if I went and I try to log something that doesn't exist, like score, blah, 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 and I save? Well, to begin with, Visual Studio itself is going to try to warn you that this does not exist. But if you're persistent, you want to keep going, you're actually going to see this error here in Unity. That's also going to tell you the name of the file where the error is. So very useful for your students. That's where the file is, example.cs, this one here. And then what line it is at, line 11. So in Visual Studio Code, you have the lines here. This is all executed from top to bottom. And line number 11, this is where the error is. And quite often there will be like a recommended fix, but in this case, we're just gonna go and fix it ourselves. All right, so if you wanted to create other types of variables, you can do so by typing float. That's for decimal numbers. For example, if you had something like height or energy, and then you had something like 180.5. Although when you're creating floats, you do need to add an F at the end, and then semicolon. Another common one is that of string, which is a piece of text. So you could have string, and then you use double quotes, Pablo, or you could also have a Boolean, which is true or false. So you could have something called is alive, and it could be true, or it could be false. And you can show any of those variables here in the debugging area. But when you're working with Unity, you probably want to do something a bit more interactive. So we're going to very quickly go over a mouse clicking interaction. So let's say that we want to keep track of how many times we're clicking something. Outside of start, I'm going to type void on mouse down, and then press enter to have Visual Studio autocomplete that for us. So this is something that comes in Unity. It comes in this mono behavior class. So you don't need to worry about how it's implemented, but you can go and use it. So I can go and type debug.log, and I can say clicked. So let's try it out, see if it works. Let's press play, and we're going to now. Important, when you're running the game, the interaction happens in the game view, not in the scene view. If you go in the scene view and make changes, and then the game stops, those changes are not saved, just so you're aware of. So as we said, we wanted to click this cube, so I cannot click it here. Nothing's going to happen if I click it there. I have to click it in the game view. And you can see that every time I click, we see this click, 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 click. Cool. So that's how we can have some sort of clicking happening. What if we want to hide this cube when we click? Well, we can do that by typing game object. This is just a predefined property in this class that gives us access to this game object. And then you press dot set active. So this is a method that is part of Unity game objects. So a lot of these things is all new at first, but as you keep repeating some of these, it all becomes familiar. We're going to set that active to false. So if we now go and run our game, we should be able to click on that cube and make it disappear. So if you want to have some basic conditionals or branching, you could count how many times you're clicking. For example, let's define a variable here that's going to be available here in our code. You could set this count or like number of clicks, num_clicks, We haven't clicked any time yet, and we could have a maximum number of clicks. Maximum clicks could be 5. So every time that we click, we're going to increase our number of clicks by setting the value to the old value plus 1. You can also do this in a short, there's a shorthand that is num clicks plus plus. It's common in many programming languages. And then you can have what's called an if statement, which is going to check for a condition. So you can say that if the number of clicks is greater than or equal to the maximum number of clicks. So you can see how I can kind of start typing and then I can press enter to complete that for me. If that's true, then I'm going to use the curly brackets and you press enter, and this is what's going to happen. We're going to hide our game object. Let's save that, go back to Unity, and run that again. And if we click 1, 2, 3, oops, something's not, well, there it is. I think something might not be working as expected. Let's just try that one more time. So we expect to see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Did I set this to 5? I must have set this to 5. Apologies for that. It is working as expected. Cool. Now, what if you would like to have the ability to change that maximum number just here without having to go into the code? Well, you can make this a public variable. That means the variable can be accessed and modified from outside of this script, of this class. If you do that, if you give it that public name, and then you go back to the editor, you're actually going to see it here in the inspector. And you can change that to 1. And you can go and play your game. And you could go, and now if you click just once, it disappears. So this is just the tip of the iceberg of what scripting can do in Unity. So what I want to show you is just a little bit of what we can do in terms of classroom and projects. So we got quite far with this in this short time. We learned how to create and attach scripts to a game object. We talked about variables, clicking game objects, and also disabling game objects. I forgot to mention conditions or branching as well. So in the Zenva Schools platform, if you go and filter by Unity, the first course here is when you click on it, you'll see how it is mapped to the Australian curriculum version 9, version 8.4. I do recommend that Unity is used with students that have done some text-based programming. So if they've done, say, a little bit of Python, I would recommend that instead of going directly from scratch to Unity, just because there could be a lot to take in at first. But if they've done a little bit of Python Turtle or something like that, I think Unity could be a good fit. So in the lessons, we go over similar things to what we have been doing here. It's all done in a as a screencast with challenges, and you can people can either watch the videos, or all of the videos also have these written notes as well that can be downloaded. And there are formative quizzes along the way, and we cover things, let me show you here, that are beyond just the programming aspects, such as the stages of project management that are outlined in the curriculum, that include defining the project, flow charts, design, pseudocode, project evaluation, and all of those things. So usually you would start with this course until that should be, all of the students from, say, year 9 should be able to complete it in a term. And then the majority of the students should also be able to complete Unity mini projects, which is obviously also mapped to the Australian curriculum. And this one covers a few more advanced things like iterations, like a bit of physics in Unity, user interaction, and it's got a few different mini games in it, like a bowling game, a ski slope, and things like that. So there is a little bit of that moving the character that was asked by Kimberly. And there's also the next course, which I would say it's probably more for the more advanced students or on elective. This is where you develop like a fully fledged 3D, like third-person game that has a controller where you can move around, jump, and you can do things like, it has like multiple levels, game over screen, scores, enemies. So this one is definitely a little bit more advanced. If you are after more Unity content, we also have additional courses here that are not mapped to curriculum that are suitable for people who've completed probably a couple of the first 2 or 3 of the others. So we have also a 2D platformer, first-person shooter, farming, role-playing game, strategy game, and we're also able to bring dozens of other courses from our developer platform, Zenva Academy. So we can do that for our schools as well, and we do that all the time. That's why you see those here. So a few more things here. In teaching something like Unity, you wouldn't only do the programming, but like I said, there's the project management. And a good case study that we have where one of our teachers, or one of the teachers using our platform, shared how they did it is here in case studies. So there are two here that are relevant to Unity. One of them is how Logan Lee School used it for a VET, for a Certificate 3, used the Unity courses, and they not only were able to use the Unity courses, but they also were able to pass a review from the government, an audit with the reporting provided by Zenva Schools. And then the other one here is Ignatius Park. So what they did was, besides going through these courses that you've seen, they did things like, let me show you, like mind mapping, and they created presentations, and they created slides of the code and analyzed different features of the game. So you can really build on all of these and do it in multiple different ways. User interface is also an important part, especially from the new curriculum. So we've added the ability to, we've integrated this open source project into Zenva Schools, but it is hosted in our server, so it's not blocked by EQ, because we removed all of the sharing and like all of the integrations that would make it a banned resource. So it no longer has, sharing on Google or all of those things. It doesn't have integration with anything. It just runs on the browser, in fact. So here you can create the flowcharts for your algorithms, and you can also quickly do the wireframes for the games or the websites or the sitemaps and all of those things. So you can kind of drag buttons and drag different UI elements and save this as an image. If you are looking for the more details on the curriculum mapping, there's version 8.4 and 9. So if you go there, you're going to see all of the content descriptors. So if you ever, waking up in the middle of the night, not knowing how to teach ACTVIP 029, you are bound to find here, because we have full coverage of the curriculum in the version 8.4 and a pretty good coverage already of version 9. For your own professional development, you can also keep track of your progress here. So what I'm going to do now is go over the Q&A so that we can address all the questions. So I'm just going to go here, and it says here, do you have classrooms where a teacher has a list of students so the teacher can track student work easily? Yes. So the way that you give students access is that you create a digital classroom here in Classrooms. So for instance, I have a year 7 here in my demo account. And so you add courses to that classroom, and then you add your students to that classroom. Those students can only see the classrooms that you've added. And then what you do to track the progress, like it's been asked here in the questions, is that you can select the course and generate report. And so you can view all of your students, their progress, last activity, which lessons they've completed or started, quiz results, and you can drill down and just see actual, individual student reports. So you can then see pretty much everything they're doing or they're not doing, and all of the different quiz attempts as well. All of the information can be exported and seen in that manner. So another question that we've often get asked, I'll show you, is how people can access. There are many options for that, but usually you go to login.zenva.com. You can set up your schools to use username, like a student number, or email address as the login. If you set up to be the user, the email address as the login, and you are using Google Classroom or Google Apps or Microsoft Office, Azure, all of those, they can log in by just clicking here. They can log in with their Google Classroom account or their Microsoft. But you still need to add those students manually when you first create their accounts here. You can copy and paste their names and email addresses, add them to a classroom, and that's it. Another question here I see. I think we've gone through all of the questions that we had here. So I want to see if there were other questions or anything else that you would like me to cover, because we're right on time. It looks like there are no further questions. If any more questions come up, feel free to email me, contact us. And also, if you are not using Zenva Schools, you can request a free trial as well by going to schools.zenva.com and filling up the form in there. Just before you head off, for the schools that are using Zenva Schools, which I know there's quite a few here in the call, we have put together this article in our help portal, which is tips for starting a new school year. Because when you are starting a new school year, there are some things that I would recommend doing, like for example, deleting old teacher accounts so they no longer have access, deleting the old students. So this is just kind of like a checklist that I would strongly recommend you look at. And you can find the help portal by just going to Zenva Schools, and it's on the menus. Once you log in, it's just here under my account support that will take you to the help portal. So there's a last question here. There were 3 basic courses listed there for unit. What would you see as the second course? Sure, yeah. If you select Unity here, there's only one correct order here, which is 1, 2, and 3, because this is getting familiar with the editor. This is really brushing up on those programming skills with mini projects, and this is jumping into a bigger project. The virtual reality courses are only relevant for schools that are really interested in VR, and this assumes that you have already done a little bit of the Unity stuff. And then we have those extra ones. Those extra ones, I would say, if you've done these 2, you might be fine for them. If you find that they're a little bit too difficult, then maybe you need to do a little bit of this one. All right. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for joining. Feel free to contact me if any questions. And I look forward to seeing you in future webinars. Have a good night, and we'll see you in the next one.